right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar tonight. I'm very excited to introduce you to Matthew Hinçman. He is a local Jamaica Plain artist. He's been creating public art in Jamaica Plain for many years. One of the pieces that I think he is probably most famous for is the Jamaica Pond bench. So if you've seen that, that is his work. He also is a professor of sculpture at Mass College of Art and Design. And what we're going to be talking about today, among his other works, is the one that was recently commissioned by the city of Boston for outside of the library, which is Wythe Web. So I'm going to turn it over to Matthew now.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. You're probably sitting at your dining room table having your dinner or something, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come listen to my talk today. Special shout out to my family members who are here today and all the neighbors from my street who I see in the attendee list over here too, and all the residents of JP who are zooming in tonight. Thank you. And I want to thank the JP Historical Society and the Friends of the Jamaica Plain branch of the Boston Public Library for inviting me to give this talk. And I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm just going to launch in with some images. I'm going to talk about not only about Wythe Web, but I'm going to really start talking about my evolution as an artist and as a public artist, and also as an artist in Jamaica Plain and what that means to me. So let's start. So Wythe Web, an approach to public art. First, I want to share with you some works that I really inspired me as a young person. Mags Harry's Glove Cycle, which you can see at the Porter Street Station on the Red Line. And also Carlos Dorian had this small stone sculpture at the Decorative Museum and Sculpture Park in Lincoln,
Matthew,
Mass.
just so you know, we can't see your screen at the moment. So yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. I was hoping someone would chime in because I was like, maybe they don't know that let me try that again.
That's perfect now.
Awesome. I thought something seemed off. Okay, here we go. So Wythe Web, an approach to public art. One of the earliest works that I was really inspired by is Mags Harry's Glove Cycle, which you can see at the Porter Street Station on the Red Line in Cambridge. And also Carlos Dorian's sculpture at the Decorative Museum and Sculpture Park. This is a small piece of his, this small scale sculpture. And both of these pieces, what I was really intrigued by is that they were works of art in the public space, but yet they were very intimate and they were kind of like surprises. I mean, you may actually pass some of these gloves that Mags had created and not even know that they were cast out of bronze. You might have thought, oh, somebody dropped a glove, and you might just pass by on your way. And same thing with this piece by Carlos Dorian. That sculpture, that stone sculpture, is probably only about 2 feet long. And so you might just not even see this little stone stairway carved in it. And so the kind of surprise element in the works was really inspiring to me as a young artist. My first piece of public art was created also in guerrilla style, like some of the other works that I had done, at the facade of the Massachusetts College of Art building that was built in 1929, and it was taken over by Beth Israel in 1992. I was a student at the college at that time, and I made this plaque that I guerrilla installed to the front of the building. And then another part of my art practice is thinking about found objects. And so this is where I try to take the language of the everyday, the language of things that already exist in the world, and recreate them and kind of change them or shift them a little bit to create some sort of a surprise element in the public space. This is a piece that I made back in 1995 called Untitled, but it was a handmade found object. I went to graduate school at UC San Diego, where they have an amazing collection called the Stewart Art Collection. This collection, there's an amazing short documentary called Pay Attention that highlights this collection. And the artist Kiki Smith says in that documentary, it's really important to have things that are inexplicable physically in your daily life. And I think that for me, this also plays into how I think about creating works for the public space. And that I'm not, so much of what we see in the public space is designed to make sense. Go left here, don't go right, don't park here. throughway this way, signage, et cetera, is all meant to be very clear. And I think that artworks in the public space can have a different kind of a function. They can provide a space of wonder because they're kind of unknown. They can be ambiguous, and the viewer can bring a lot of their own history and their own narratives to the piece. This is one of the pieces in the Stewart Art Collection at UC San Diego. It is Michael Asher's Untitled from 1991. And what it is it's a standard institutional bubbler, water fountain that's carved out of granite. And it's just this impeccably created object, all to scale. It functions. Students on campus over time have deemed that this is a magic water bubbler, and they go and drink from it right before exams to help them with their exams. So this is the way this object that's just very much like a standard object, but just a little bit different, and has really begun a whole bunch of new traditions on the campus. My own addition to the collection at UC San Diego was a temporary art project. I had been looking at the campus and seeing these steel posts all around campus. They're called bollards. And I would say to people, I'm thinking about an art project with those bollards. And they would say, well, what's a bollard? I was like, well, it's those gray posts that are all over campus that prevent vehicles from entering the pedestrian areas. And they're like, oh, I don't even see them. I mean, they were actually designed, again, in this sense, they're designed to sort of blend in seamlessly with the environment. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to sort of call attention to them in multiple different ways? So I was thinking back on my art school days of historical objects that had a similar form and shape. And I remember these Greek sculptures called Herms. The MFA has a few of these strange objects with the bust of Hermes on the top and an erect phallus on the front. And so I forged, welded, and fabricated 3 versions in steel. These objects would stand sentinel across the roads. They actually were normally distributed across campus, and they actually became very beloved. And there were some funny stories that happened around them, including this one where some maintenance workers saved one of them. They thought it was going to be destroyed, and they had crafted this copper fig leaf to make as a modest statement, and it was pretty funny. Let's see. And then another public work that I've done, not fairly recently, is think about what other kinds of objects can live in the public space that can maybe bring some new meaning into public space. I'm the kind of person who, if I see a penny on the ground, I always pick it up. I'm very interested in coins as miniature little sculptures. They are little bas-relief sculptures. And so I created my own coins called Hard Times Tokens for the 21st Century. Using typical tropes of the idea of commodity, which is often found on currency, like our wheat pennies had the wheat on the back, coins from Japan have rice, coins from Mexico have corn. These are items that can be dried and stored and kept as surplus and then shared again. And in that sense, this idea of the wealthy can get wealthier, but the regular folks oftentimes are, and I think about images in art, have potatoes and apples in their basements, especially here in New England. I think of Van Gogh's The Potato Eaters as another iconic image showing these kinds of foodstuffs that regular folk would have in their basements. And so I put these out on the street for people to find. It was featured on Planet Money a long time ago. There's a picture of them. So materiality is really important to me. And well, this next piece I'm going to show you wasn't a public piece. It's called Brick Traps. And it's what's interesting about it is that I hand fashioned all these little bricks. They were in an exhibition at the Boston Sculptors Gallery downtown. And I would see people walking through the gallery, looking at the work, and literally people would stand up, walk right up to one of these traps, and they'd kick it on purpose, as to kind of acknowledge, like, is this thing real? It was hard for them to fathom that the material reality of the object. And so that's something that's extremely important to me, and how that affects the viewer's perception of an object, and that in somehow it's real. There's another shot. Similarly, I made a different bench. Anna mentioned my Jamaica Pond bench earlier tonight. And this bench is called the Acton bench. It was made for the Acton Boxborough Arboretum. And as an artist, artists were invited to create site-specific installations for the natural environment of the Arboretum. And the Arboretum, of course, had been farmland for a couple hundred years, where, New Englanders moved stones from point A to point B, made stone walls, created enclosures for animals, and farmed the land. And then the farm went into disuse and forest grew again. But as part of the dictate for the artists working in the space, we couldn't disturb any natural artifacts on the site. So creating works for the natural environment, but don't touch the man-made things like stone walls, etc. So I made this bench so you could really look at really look at nature. So you could sit right there in that bench and look at nature. And one other project that I made that's not in Jamaica Plain, don't worry, we're going to get to JP soon, is the sidelight replacement project. This is part of a fellowship that I did with the Design Studio for Social Intervention. And at the Four Corners Geneva Ave station, where there's a renovated MBTA stop, it's a very cold, architecturally, it's a very cold space, all cast concrete and galvanized steel and glass. And all the glass in all the stations along that area had been vandalized and broken. The space itself was not very welcoming. The trains were very expensive, didn't run on a very good schedule. They weren't used by residents of the area. So these new spaces weren't very helpful. So, but at the same time, then there was this vandalism that happened. So I decided to recreate the glass that had been broken in this colorful steelwork. And so I installed this filigree as a way to sort of both acknowledge the vandalism that happened and also point to the kind of brutalism of the architecture in the space. And since these were installed, I've actually received emails from folks who want to replace all the glass in this particular station with such fanciful metalwork. So hopefully that'll happen. So public art in JP. So I was just trying to give you, I hope I didn't go too fast. It's hard because I can't see anybody and I can't tell what, maybe I'm going too fast or too slow, I don't know. I wanted to share with you, there's 6 pieces that I've created that are here on this map. And I can send the map maybe as a link later. Here in Jamaica Plain. And I'm just going to go through them quickly. You could get off at the Stony Brook station, and this is a little walk you could take here in JP to see these 6 pieces. So the first is the fence at the Alice Mendel School. I completed that in 2010. And there's another shot of it. This was a fence that was funded by the Edward Ingersoll Brown Fund to enclose a outdoor classroom. And there's another shot of it right there. And what's really cool about this, and this is where I think that when we think about the time frame of objects as they live in the public space, we have to wait a long time actually for them to really fully understand how they resonate with the community. So about 7, 8 years after I installed this, maybe even longer, maybe it was 9 years later, I realized that they had used the ironwork from the fence to create a new logo for the school. And I actually saw this logo on a kid wearing a t-shirt. And I was just thrilled to see that the ironwork that I had created had turned into this amazing t-shirt for the Alice Mendel School, which is a wonderful school here in Boston. Second piece, this is very small. This is up on Center Street near the Curley School. It's this little tiny cast stainless steel angel that sits on the parking sign here. That's piece number 2 in JP. Piece number 3 is the piece that Anna mentioned, the Jamaica Pond bench, which was completed in 2006. FITB, fill in the blank. This is a piece that's at City Feed in their window, right at Center Street and Seaverns. There were companion pieces. This was created with Best Dressed Signs. Josh Luke is the artist who he and his wife Meredith own Best Dressed Signs. They do incredible work. You'll see a lot of their work here in Jamaica Plain, like the Arbor Way auto shop down by Forest Hills. They did all that signage on the walls. Really incredible work. There were a couple other pieces we had in this series, but they're no longer there. Still in 2014, that's just across from the monument, which is a small bronze piece in the lower left part of your screen. And then Wythe Web in 2021. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of those pieces to really dig a little bit deeper into my practice as a public artist and as a local artist before I finish up talking about Wythe Web. So here's my approach to public art. So I'm going to start with still. The still as a site, that's the first thing that kind of appeals to me as I'm wandering through the world is I'm looking at what kind of opportunities exist in the public space to create a sculpture, to create new kinds of meaning. And here at the site for Still, there was a site. Here's the picture before I installed the piece. And if you look on the lower right-hand side, there's that same post, and there are these two bolts that sit on top of it. You can see it again closer up. And these two bolts that stand up out of this abandoned gas lamppost, it's actually the base of a gas lamppost, probably from the late 19th century. And they had these really incredible bolts that stick up out of the top of that. And I thought, this is a perfect place to build something. And I spent actually a couple of years considering, walking past the site and considering what would be an appropriate kind of a sculpture to put here. And then I realized that I really had to, whatever I put there had to be in conversation with the monument across the way. Of course, it's the Soldiers Memorial, installed in 1871 to memorialize the soldiers who lost their lives in the Union Army during the Civil War conflict, and from West Roxbury. When Jamaica Plain at that point in time was West Roxbury. And, so in 2014, when I finally sort of decided what I was going to put there, I decided that it would be important for me to put an object that asked the questions of how far as a society we had come since the end of the Civil War in terms of race relations, in terms of building an equitable world. And so I struck upon the idea of using a hoodie sweatshirt, the image of a hoodie sweatshirt, as a symbol for the murder of Trayvon Martin, and wanting to memorialize him, but all the other people of color who are targeted and murdered in this country, and kind of the failure of that monument in a sense, in terms of what it sort of tried to support in terms of commemorating the men who died in that conflict. But at the same time, 150 years later, how far have we come? That was a working title for a long time, How Far? And in the end, the piece is called Still. Here are some production shots of it, how I attached an internal structure onto those two bolts. And then that's some of the bronze pieces as they were being assembled, just making sure it was going to all fit correctly. And then the completed piece on top of that post. And another piece there. And the site again. So for me, and what's interesting is to see how a piece lives in the space. So I had a woman who lives in the neighborhood come up to me, and we were talking about art, and she said, "Oh, you're an artist, what have you done?" I told her about the bench, and she said, "Wait a minute, did you create that piece over by the monument Still?" I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "Thank you so much for making that. It was the first time, that was the first entrance I was able to find and have a conversation with my children about race in this country, and and inequity in this country." And so there was another woman who left a story as part of the poet Ron Johnson, who was a artist in residence. I believe I'm saying his name. That is his name, at the Curtis Hall in the library. And he had a phone booth installed at the JP library that there were all these stories. And there was a woman who talked about seeing this piece in the neighborhood and about how meaningful it was to her that this memorial to Trayvon Martin was here. So, you start to hear those stories and see how the pieces begin to take on a life of their own. So I would be remiss to not talk about the Jamaica Pond bench from 2006. So this is a little bit more, goes into a little more depth of how I think about things in the world. Generally, when we're walking through the world, I'm just seeing images. So there's not a lot of words in my head, but I'm seeing images. And so walking around the pond one day, 1,000 years ago, I'm looking at one of the benches, and I see the casting that forms, they're called stanchions, at the end of the bench. And in my mind's eye, I see it mirrored like this. So I see it mirrored like this, and I thought, wow, that would be such a cool object if it were made. And in that moment, I saw all the different potential kinds of meaning that it could have. It could be a kayak, it could be a canoe, it could be a coffin, it could be so many different things. You could lie down inside of it, although it's not very comfortable, come to find out. So I went ahead, and this is just a Photoshop mock-up of it, and then I proceeded to actually produce the object. I was able to procure the actual castings that are the same as the ones that the city uses, and then I bolted these big chunks of steel to the bottom. and I installed the piece. And this is what it looks like in one of its early installations. And it was a guerrilla installation too. I did not have permission. I brought it there early in the morning with some friends, and we dug some little trenches and just spiked through those steel blocks. It was installed in about 15 minutes. And ta-da! And then it was installed, and people started using it and started posting about it online. And then it disappeared because the city decided that they didn't put it there and it shouldn't be there. So I did get into trouble for putting it there, but the folks from the Parks Department really liked the piece. They endorsed the piece, and I was able to put it back again. This is some folks from the city installing it for me after they had removed it. Same folks did that. What was really interesting at this point in time, and this goes to, again, my practice as an artist, no sooner had these two guys finished installing the piece, then a woman came up to them, or in fact, they were working on it. She said, "Excuse me, sirs, what is this piece what is this thing you're doing here?" And one of them said it, his name's Francis, the guy who's leaned over right there. He says, "Well, that's the artist right there. He did it." And she says, "Oh, it's art." And she stormed off. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but immediately, literally, it wasn't, 10 minutes later, it was done and kids started jumping at it and hanging out in it, which was really cool. And later on, I had given a presentation to a group of art lovers. And there was a woman in the crowd who goes to the pond all the time. And she said, I walked around the pond, I see that thing all the time, but I never knew it was art. So I never went over to look at it. So I find it fascinating that to literally name something art can have such different impacts on different people. For one person, it means that they don't want to deal with it because for whatever reason. And for another person, they have to be told that it's art. So I hope that the work actually appeals to the curiosity and the wonder in all folks, that they want to see, like, what is this thing? What does it mean? What does it do? There's no plaque there at the site of where the bench is, and that's on purpose, so that people can make up their own narratives in the site. Here's some pictures that folks have sent to me. And over time, 2006, I can't believe it's been there over 15 years now. And back to my original drawing that I had used this drawing to actually convince the company that makes them to sell me the raw castings. A young man sent me an image. He got a tattoo of the bench on his arm. So he sent me this email. I had never met this young person. And he said, I got this tattoo of the bench because I wanted to get a tattoo of Jamaica Plain. This, for me, this is iconic Jamaica Plain. There's our iconic Jamaica Plain. And recently, I just finished up a fundraiser for a Jamaica Plain organization, Community Servings. It was a collaboration with City Feed downtown. We sold a bunch of t-shirts and sweatshirts, and we raised over $1,000 for community servings with these sweatshirts. So it's pretty cool. And there I am with my sweatshirt at the bench. So now to Wythe Web. So actually, it was Wythe Web. This was a long time coming. It took quite a long time to produce this work of art. Originally was told that I won the commission in 2017. And it was the first commission to be granted under the New Percent for Art program in the city. And there were a lot of, there were a lot of things we had to, both the city and I had to go through to make it happen and figure out a lot of things. So, the libraries are near and dear to my heart. I worked at the Reading Public Library when I was in high school. And I've always found libraries to be magical places. And of course, it's also next to Curtis Hall, which is this incredible place that also helps bring the community together. And they both comprise this like historic site, this historic municipal campus here in JP. When I worked in the library, primarily I just put books away. And what I loved about that job was that I'd be putting books away that I would never actually seek out. They would actually seek me out in a way. And I think that that's part of how I think when I'm creating a new work of art, is I try to just open my eyes, look around, and see what actually comes to me. And even when I would look up a book at a library, and this is one of the special things about libraries, you look up that book that you want to get, and on the way to go pull that book off the shelves, out of the stacks, you actually, you find 7 other books that you need. And it reminds me of a quote from one of my favorite books, Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And Dirk Gently is a private investigator, And this is what he says. He says, my own strategy is to find a car or the nearest equivalent, which looks as if it knows where it's going, and follow it. I rarely end up where I was intending to go, but I often end up somewhere that I needed to be. So I love this idea of an open-ended discovery versus a directed intention. And that oftentimes when we talk about art, people might ask, so what does the work mean? What did you want it to mean? And in a way, when a viewer asks that question of the artist, you're trying to get into the artist's head about what they're trying to say. In fact, that's another way people say, what are you trying to say with this work of art? And some work, there's a lot of artwork that's like that. It's declarative. It's didactic. It's a statement. But then there's other works that are questions, or maybe they're a prompt, where it's like the beginning of a novel. It's that first sentence, and then as a viewer, you're meant to bring the rest of the narrative. So that's for me more the kind of practice that I have. I spent a lot of time doing research at the main branch as well. Fascinating. Eve Griffin, who is the head librarian in the arts section there. I worked with her quite a bit. We had a lot of fun. I mean, it's just kind of, the library is such an incredible resource here in the city of Boston, and I encourage everybody to hang out at all of the branches that you can. It was really amazing. And not long before one of my first presentations to the Boston Art Commission, I found this book at Boomerangs here in JP, The New Book of Knowledge. And it's funny, just like the new book, because of course, this book of knowledge that is often housed in our libraries is ever changing. There's new information that's always coming along, and some of the old information that we have is maybe not so relevant, or maybe not even valid anymore. And we hold on to it because we want to know and understand and learn from perhaps what we thought was true, like butter is bad for you or something like that. But I think that it's ever changing. And that foundational aspect of it is what kind of led me to think about foundations. And as a kid growing up north of Boston, in kind of a rural area, there were lots of foundations out in the woods, like old wrecks. I don't even know what they were, but you wondered what they were and who had been there. And at the same time, there were new developments going up. And so there was brand new foundations. And I love the idea of the foundation can be this object that points in both directions in terms of time. It can be both forward-looking and backward-looking. It can be a historical object, or it can be something that's being built up for a new purpose, or new ideas. The materiality of the site here, the campus between Curtis Hall and the library, not only the new building, but also the old building, is what really inspired me. Some of this brickwork, which is so typical, of course, of our New England towns and Boston. I took a lot of photographs of the bricks. On the lower left-hand side, you can see what's called the Flemish bond pattern that's produced on the new addition to the library, where those end pieces of the bricks stand out a little bit. So they have a really beautiful texture. And on the right-hand side, that's the original brick pattern of the library. I wanted to bring that into the work that I was doing. And I started doing these funny little sketches. These are just these funny little sketches. I thought, well, what are the materials? I wanted to bring some color into the site. I wanted to use bricks. I wanted to use stone. And so these are some of the early quirky, weird little things that I was drawing, and doing some Photoshop sort of montages with stones I had seen on my bike rides around town. And then, of course, you know, I've already mentioned the materiality of the brick trap objects that I had made, and how people are like, well, what are these things? And they would kick them. Other kinds of material things too. When I talked about the bollards, a colleague of mine talked about how he would see people walk past the bollard and wrap their knuckles on the top, as if to make sure that they were real, you know. And I think that that's something that I always want the works that I make in the public space to have, that kind of the same language of the durable built world. That gives them a sort of, it's not prominence, but like a validity. There's an interesting validity that I think it affords the viewer to sort of imagine, to make them believable in a way. This is the site, obviously early on, when just the little benches were there. And I also think about benches, as I mentioned before, in seating. This piece, when it was installed in the exhibition, the Acton bench, the curator, Nick Capasso, who's now the director at the Fitchburg Museum of Art, he said to me, he's like, we almost didn't put this in the show, Matthew, he said, because we weren't sure that you would build it strong enough for people to sit in. And so that's, again, something about like art and its relation to artifice, Well, if it's an artist building a bench, then is it artifice, and is it not going to be able to hold people's butts up off the ground, or is it just going to fall apart? And so I think that that's just an interesting dynamic within an art practice, that there's this convincing that one has to do. It's going to be okay. I'm going to make it strong enough. It's not going to fall apart, etc. So, and the bench, of course, as well. I've seen people walk past this bench and just kind of, photograph was taken today, and kind of just like tap on it as if is it gonna fall over? Am I seeing this thing real? That's when I decided to think about putting in, oh, there's another image of the bench, putting in these folding chairs, like these ubiquitous chairs that could just blow away in the wind. And you find them in everybody's backyard, or maybe in the back of your car, so that when you find yourself on a nice sunny day someplace, yeah, I got a chair in the back, that have almost no weight, and to transform them through material intervention into these cast bronze objects. I could just feel, and that's the best way to really describe it, I could feel this notion that these objects would have a lot of resonance in the space. So I'm just going to show you, these aren't in the best order. I still need to get some more photos of the process, but this is actually an image of the one of the molds, one half of the mold that they used to create the bronze chairs. The mold will be closed and filled with wax. And here's one of the wax components. So this is made out of wax that will then be encased in a ceramic material. The wax is burned out, and then it's replaced with bronze. But you can see where at the top of the screen, where what will be the metal piping that holds the woven vinyl, where it's bent, you can see it's lighter there because the wax is so thin. And that means that the bronze, in the end, when it was cast, is also that thin. The foundry that produced these, they're really magicians. They did an extraordinary work translating these objects into bronze. Here's some other pictures of those details, which you can see now, of course, in person when you go and see them in bronze. This is the site. This is what it looked like before the intervention. Of course, we shifted the flagpole from the center of the lawn over to the corner of the lawn near the library. There's another shot of it. And this is what we proposed way back in the day. And I always find this to be really fun to do this. And this is what we ended up with. This is a better angle to show that particular piece. But this is when we were still doing some construction work there. Let's see what else I have. This was taken today, actually. This morning I went down to take a picture of the site. And here's a couple other shots. You know, if you're looking at it right now, one of the things that was really important to me was creating a sight line from the library over to the monument and the Unitarian Church. That's why there's that strong diagonal across the lawn. The walls are also offset from one another to create some interesting sight lines that I hope will be interesting for folks to sort of hang out in. The gap in the long wall that is flanked by the two stones, that was something that came during the process of actually creating the work. There's a gas line that actually runs in that space. And while we could have excavated around that and cast concrete and put brickwork around it, I was like, nah, let's just stay away from it and we'll leave that open. So I love responding to a site and not having everything locked down permanently in terms of a design right away, and that really able to work with the contractor, work with an amazing person to work on site. And I tried to create these little groupings of areas on the lawn that people can interact in different places. Multiple groups can hang out and still feel like they have space from one another. And I hope one of my friends who lives nearby said he's seen somebody already doing parkour off of, you know, that sort of jumping, flipping off of walls, doing parkour off the walls, which is pretty exciting. And today, when I was there, there was this really interesting, there was a book there that has an ashtray on it. It's like sitting on the table. It's The End of Art by Donald Cuspit, which I thought was pretty funny intervention into my intervention. And so I wanted to end my talk with that particular image. I'm sure I went fast. You know, as I hold on, I'll go back 1, 2. You know, this was the site today, and the site was opened on November 4th, and it was kind of a chilly day. Mayor Janey was there on hand, cutting the ribbon with my family alongside, and it was a really great day. But it hasn't been able to see the same kind of usage, of course, it will see come the spring and summer months. And just like the Jamaica Pond bench took 15 years for somebody to get a tattoo of it on their arm, I'm hoping and imagining that this piece will take on a life of its own over the next number of years. And as that happens, more meaning will be created out of it. And I hope that what I've done is created a space that has opportunity for meaning making. As opposed to me sort of prescribing a particular meaning, I'm hopeful it's a space that is enough aligned with the built environment there, but also shifted, quirky enough, and open enough that folks can find their own voice in creating meaning within the space. So I guess I'll leave it there. And I see some questions are popping up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That should take a second. Did that work? Nope, it didn't work. There we go.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I thought it was a perfect pace.
Oh, good.
And we do have some questions, so I'm going to ask the ones that we've already gotten in throughout the presentation, but if anyone else has one, please submit that as well. This event goes till 7:30, so we have a decent amount of time for questions.
Perfect.
So the first one is, can you talk a little bit more about what guerrilla art or guerrilla installed art means?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, guerrilla art, when I installed the piece at Jamaica Pond, I put it there without permission, and it was actually in May. It was raining. It started raining the minute we installed the bench, and it rained for like a week. And so I think that, it rained for like a week, and I actually had my name on a postcard that was attached to the bench, but it kept getting taken off. And so I kept putting new ones on. And then I went away to Maine, actually. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Elena, she went down and she kept putting new postcards on as they got taken away. Finally, she went down to put a new postcard on one day and the bench was gone. So I ended up calling the Parks Department. I did have a cell phone back in 2006, my first cell phone. And I talked to the head of the Parks Facilities Department, Bernie Lynch. And we played phone tag for a time, and he was kind of irate with me, as you can imagine, and for installing this piece without permission. And so finally we got on the phone together, and I said, hi, and this is Matthew Hinçman. I made the bench. He says, all right. He had kind of a good Boston accent. He says, so what is this? He's let me get my notes. What is this? Some kind of guerrilla art? And so guerrilla art is, it's artwork that is placed in the public space without permission. Graffiti is a form of guerrilla, generally, not all the time, but generally a form of guerrilla art. Banksy is a guerrilla artist, much of his work. Shepard Fairey. So there's a lot of folks who create work in the public sphere that is unsanctioned work. So that's specific. That's a short answer of what guerrilla art is. Not the history of guerrilla art, but that's some guerrilla art for you.
Thank you. And thank you for that excellent Boston accent.
Oh, good.
And we have another definitional question. So can you also explain materiality? Sure.
So materiality, like when a thing, I'm in kind of a studio space here. When the material that a thing is made of carries meaning and or importance along with it. Like, it's not just the shape of it. It's not just like, for instance, it might be that an object that's cast, well, here's a good example, actually. There's a very famous glass artist in this country, Dale Chihuly. And he makes ever larger things. There's a big green tree in the MFA's courtyard. And he was making a piece for Las Vegas Casino. And it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he thought, well, why are we making these things out of glass? We'll make it out of plastic. And they developed a way to make these things out of plastic. And the casino was like, no way. We don't want a plastic Dale Chihuly. So the material glass and the expense of it, the threat of it, the precision of it, all that carries into that object. And so he never got to make the plastic one. He had to make it out of glass. And without it being glass, it would have just been a big dusty lump up in the ceiling of this place. It wouldn't have been interesting. It's like a Swarovski crystal chandelier that's made out of plastic, right? So it's how materiality is about the kind of meaning that comes along with the material.
Great, thank you. That was a great example. Another question about the specific piece is someone is wondering why your walls aren't parallel to the architecture of Curtis Hall.
Good question. So as I mentioned, it's hard to see in the photographs, but I was really interested in creating some new sight lines. And I think that, when you're making, like, if one possible meaning that's conveyed by the object is that these are foundation walls from a thing that no longer exists, I thought it made a lot of sense to not follow the existing plan of the site. I wanted to disrupt the order of the site. Okay, so, it's interesting because the renovation of the Jamaica Plain Library, that extension that they put on the front, also it follows the curve of the oval driveway, but it actually also disrupts the sort of regular rectilinear thing that everybody likes everywhere. So I really wanted to, again, it was a disruption. So it was intentional in that it was disruptive to go against the plan, but also to create that sight line across the lawn. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
And someone wants to know, what is the material of the colored tiles in the Wythe Web piece?
Sure, yeah, they're ceramic tiles with a glaze on top. They're really beautiful. Do I have a chunk of it here? I have pieces of stuff everywhere. I thought I might be able to hold up a piece, but I guess I don't have one. They're all outside in the yard. But they're really beautiful handmade clay pieces. Elgin is the name of the company that makes them. Yeah, so.
Someone just, I'm going to go a little out of order because someone just asked, can you just define what you mean when you say sightline? Oh, sure. Yeah. So sightlines, when I applied for the commission, I really commend the city of Boston for the manner in which they asked folks to apply. They asked for a request for qualifications, which meant I had to show that I've made work in the public sphere and I could handle budgets and things like that. And then they asked for a 500-word description of what you might do. Okay, so no drawings, no design work, because you're not getting paid at this point. They didn't want people to do a lot of work. So in my proposal, I actually proposed to take like a giant glacial erratic, which is just a big boulder, basically, and split it in half and sit it on the lawn. And there were going to be some other things too. But what I wanted to do was create an aperture from the new wing of the library, that new extension out front. And you could look clear between those two rocks down to the monument and the Unitarian Church. So when I say a sight line, I'm specifically thinking about when an individual stands in a particular location, what are they going to see if they look in one direction? And so this provides its slight sight line. Just like when you look at a painting, generally a viewer's eyes will follow a similar pattern through a painting. I wanted to give voice to that's not the right word, but I wanted to allow for the viewer to see across the lawn in a particular way and to draw their eye across the lawn and then up to the monument and the church in the distance. So that's what a sight line. I hope that answered the question. Thank you. And back to those tiles
Sure.
on the top. Someone wants to know why you chose the vivid colors for those.
Sure. Yeah, that's everybody's favorite question about them, which I love to answer. So, making works that live in the public sphere, on the one hand, as I mentioned, I want it to kind of fit in with the rest of the stuff. That's why I made it out of brick, right? But you don't see any colorful brick on Curtis Hall. And really not on the library either, although they have some fancier new bricks on the library. And so thinking about just how colors behave in the environment in New England over the entire year and through all the different seasons. So when I was looking at the palette of ceramic bricks and the colors that they had available, which was quite a few, I felt like I wanted to use these three colors that they would stand out both in the summer. They would stand out in the winter and the fall, and they would really provide sort of that brightness to the site in a different way. And then it so happens that my daughter's name is Sienna, which is named the color, and that orange is burnt sienna, and then my son's name is Azure, which is blue, which is on the outside, and my wife is, of course, my sunshine of my life. So that's the yellow. How's that?
Oh, how nice, a personal connection.
Yeah.
So someone asked, and I also would love to know, what does Wythe mean?
Sure.
And they think they know what web means, but if there's like a different answer to that, feel free to answer as well.
Sure. So, when I first got to this stage of the design where I wanted to build these walls, there was a lot of talk about building walls in other parts of this country to keep people out. And so I was really interested in that conversation. And I thought it's interesting that, so a Wythe is a wall that's built of a single unit of masonry. That's basically what it is. So there's a single veneer of brick that form a Wythe. But it's also can be pronounced with, and I think that that's etymologically, that's so interesting that this wall that is meant to separate also can be pronounced with, which is like together. So I really, there's some of the names of some of my works often play on those kinds of etymological curiosities. So I thought that was really interesting. And web, it does come from the chairs and the webbing of the chairs, but also thinking about the web as a community. And so that bringing Wythe or with and web, bringing people together, and the idea of community as reflected in that notion of weaving together. So it's a whole bunch of W's all there at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. So someone asked if there was a view from the steps of the library. And since you could definitely see it from the steps of the library, I think maybe they're asking if you have a photo of the view from the steps of the library.
So by the steps of the library, the library, there are no steps in front of that. So there's a bench that goes along the new addition to the library where you can sit and look at the work. And that's where that last photograph was kind of taken from. There are the steps of Curtis Hall. And I don't have a good shot of that. It's such a wide angle. I mean, that space is 150 feet long, and it's only about, I think, 50 feet deep, something like that. So it's really, or 175 feet wide. So it's really wide, and you can't get it. I got some photographs from up above before it was completed. There was still fencing and stuff up, so they're not very good yet. So I'll have some other shots of it up on my website soon, hopefully. But I don't have a shot from the Curtis Hall steps. Yeah, all you'd get was like right down to the gate, down to the street. So
yeah, that makes sense. And so someone said they don't normally think of sculptors or artists as having a background in building, but your pieces seem to be designed to, be touched or sat on. So can you talk about how you learned how to build things in a construction-like way so that, they could be used as benches and chairs?
Yeah. Well, as an undergraduate, I went to the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and I majored in sculpture. And I had a lot of great folks that I worked with. One professor, George Greenemeyer, who is a public artist, he's got a really great piece at Back Bay T Station down on one of the Amtrak platforms. I forget which platform. It's a really beautiful piece, and he's got a piece in Cambridge. I mean, he's got pieces all over the country. I worked for him for a while, and building these large-scale steel objects, and he worked with engineers to actually make sure that everything he was building was going to be okay in the public space. So that was part of my learning, was that, learning foundry, learning welding. Rick and Laura Brown, who are former colleagues of mine at MassArt, who retired now, but they have an institute called Hanshaus Studio in Norwell, Mass. And it's they do a lot of traditional building projects. And I've worked on countless projects with them, building everything from buildings to bell towers to submarines, you name it. So, I have a lot of friends. I've worked with the Timber Framers Guild which is now an international organization, building all sorts of things. So I've just always been really interested in building stuff. And so have sort of sought out folks who could teach me what to do. And then I had my own metalworking company. There's a lot of metalwork downtown that my friends and colleagues produced through a company called Make Architectural Metalworks. That's the name of the company. My colleague Paul Meneses still runs that company and creates incredible work, both for artists, like work for artist Ellen Driscoll. We made a piece that was down the Seaport for a long time, artist Taylor Davis, but large scale projects, creating industrial bollards to prevent banks from getting blown up, stuff like that too. So, yeah.
Thank you. And a similar question. Someone said, a lot of the pieces in Wythe Web are, chairs, benches, walls. How do you define sort of the difference between just an area for sitting and this being like conceptual public art?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I haven't made like a carved marble chair yet, or a carved marble side table, but I really want to. I love this idea that can an object both be and represent at the same time? Can it be a table and also represent a table? Because that's what we often think about when we think about a work of art, right? It's representing something else. It's a stand-in for something else. But why can't a thing be both the thing and stand in for something else? Can it be both? So I think about that. It is a funny space. It's a bit of it's kind of like, it's a bit of a trickster move, I think, on my part. It's kind of like I get to trick people into thinking, look, this is harmless. It's just a little stone wall and it's a chair, But then there's something just warped enough about it that it, again, gives folks an opportunity to create a different kind of a meaning than if it were just a wall that was parallel to Curtis Hall, right? If it were just designed for seating, there would be a lot of different decisions would have been made if it were designed specifically for seating. But the decisions that I made were based more upon, again, providing quirky opportunities for folks to engage in the space.
Great, thank you. And so talking about the space, someone said that you bring a new placeness to the lawn in front of Curtis Hall and the library, and also in your other works. Can you discuss how you make place?
Well, it's when I mentioned this earlier, like how when I'm walking around the pond, when I sort of envisioned the Jamaica Pond bench, it's kind of like almost like a glitch in my vision, maybe as a way to describe it. Like the record skips for a second and you see something out of the corner of your eye, like, oh, is that what I'm seeing? And it's not there, but you realize in your mind's eye, you saw the space in a different way than it actually is. And you see some opportunities for other ways of engaging. I mean, I never would have imagined that someone would tattoo the bench on their arm, or that selling t-shirts of my weird little sculpture would be successful as a fundraiser. So it's a little hard to know if it's going to be successful or not. But I think that in terms of making place, it's like, I guess the word that I think of is disruption. And I don't think that my work is terribly disruptive, but I do believe that it is a disruption from what is expected. So I guess if there were like my elevator pitch of like, how do I operate in the realm of placemaking, it would be to disrupt something and disrupt it in a way that makes people want to engage. Like, wait, why is it like that? So.
Great, thank you. And we have one last question. And then someone asked another question, so we actually have two. So the next question is, what are new projects that you're currently working on, if you can share them with us?
So my colleague, Allison Crony-Moses, and I received a grant from the New England Foundation for the Arts to have conversations about monuments, and specifically the Jamaica Plain Soldiers Memorial. So we're actually not planning to do anything per se. We're just having conversations with folks since the fall about what the monument means to them, is the space active or not? Look like investigating, what is this, an active space? Is it not an active space? So we're kind of doing a bunch of research around that particular object, which of course everybody knows in Jamaica Plain, but I'll tell you what, and I know lots of folks from the Jamaica Plain Historical Society here, there's a lot of people who don't know what it is, don't know what it means, don't know what it stands for, feel like that little triangle is off limits. It's not, you're not allowed in there. It's, you know, so that's really interesting as such a prominent object in the neighborhood. And, you know, there was a young woman in her 20s who recently said, I think that was just put up in the 80s. So there's a, you know, and how would you know anything else? You know, there's nothing to really indicate what the heck that thing is unless you climb up. So we're looking at that right now. That's one thing. That's pretty interesting. So that's, right now, that's sort of what I'm working on. And I'm trying to do some more work in the studio as well. I have a small studio down at the brewery and trying to get some drawing and stuff down there. So.
Very cool. Will there be like a public sort of viewing or something of those conversations?
Maybe. I mean, I think we probably will try to have some sort of an activity in the springtime. We had an activity that was very word of mouth that we did during JP Open Studios, but it wasn't part of the actual Open Studio stuff because we sort of organized it too late. But, you know, we're going to continue to have conversations, and I think something will happen in the spring. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And then our last question is, have you had any unsuccessful guerrilla art installations?
Unsuccessful. Well, you know, the first piece that I showed you, the Guerrilla Goodbye, which just cataloged that mass art building, which was a really beloved building from 1929 to 1992. Again, I love that symmetry of the dates, which I had nothing to do with, but I love that symmetry. That got taken off the building. The facade of the building had to stay as part of the agreement with the state when they sold the building to Beth Israel. And so I thought, well, this is perfect. And I went out there in the middle of the night with this giant drill, because it was 1992 and they didn't have little tiny cordless drills. I had this giant drill with a giant bit, drilled holes in the facade of the building. I got my finger stuck in one of the holes, which was another story. I thought I was going to get arrested. It was ridiculous. Anyway, so that's not there anymore, which I'm disappointed about. That would be really great if that were there. Any other things, guerrilla? I mean, I guess you learn something from everything you do. I mean, I've shown you most of the guerrilla work that I've done has been around here. There were a couple other text pieces that were not guerrilla art, but they were in some of the windows, but they didn't last long. The owners decided to take them down, or they changed hands and the people took them down. I mean, I think that they're successful on some levels. I don't know if I'll be doing lots more guerrilla artwork or what that will look like in the future. I think that it's one thing to think, you know, how these things get placed in the public space. As a white man walking down the street and installing these things in broad daylight, nobody bothers me, right? But is that really I don't, and yet my other artist friends who might be a person of color, artists of color who are doing graffiti work get arrested for their work in the public space, right? So I'm really thinking a lot about privilege in the public space and who gets to put what where and why things are there. So, you know, I would say that while the works are successful, they're successful because of that privilege that I've had, and that I want to be aware of that moving forward with my own works of art in the future and partnering with other folks to create work. So I think, I don't know, it doesn't really answer your question, but I wanted to bring that complication into it a little bit, you know, so.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about as you're kind of evolving, you know,
yeah.
as you're doing this work.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you so much for doing this talk. I learned, I feel like, so much about, you know, the space, and I think I'm going to look at it like totally differently the next time I go. So very excited to have some warm weather to hang out on it.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you inviting me, and JP Historical Society as well. And thanks to everybody who came tonight. I hope you all have a great night.
Yes, and thank you to the Jamaica Plain Historical Society for letting us use your Zoom webinar license. We really appreciate it. And have a good night, everyone.
Thanks,
We're
everybody.
happy to
Have a good
help.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.